All right, this is the Coach Haas podcast, sponsored by Sports Rehab PA. And today we have another special guest on. Today we have Dr. Ari Greis, who is a board-certified physician who specializes in non-operative treatment of spinal and musculoskeletal disorders. He's the director of Medical Cannabis, or the Medical Cannabis Department at Rothman. He also is the Senior Fellow Institute of Emerging Health Professions and the Lambert Center for the Study of Medicinal Cannabis and Hemp. His interest is in treatment of chronic pain with cannabis as an alternative to opioids. So Mike did his due diligence and he brought on Dr. Greis here. So Michael, I thank you for that. How's things going?
Things are going good. Yeah, Dr. Greis and I used to kick it back at Rothman KOP, the old building, when I first started working, and he was nice enough to let me shadow and just learn and see things, because a lot of stuff you don't see in school. So had a chance to, see a bunch of different things with patients, understand a little bit more about how treatments are going on the physician side. We got to kind of co-treat a lot of patients. So it was an awesome experience.
That's awesome. Well, we're going to introduce Dr. Greis here, and then he can get into a little bit of his background and his experience here. So, Dr. Greis, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for having me. It's really great. This is actually my first podcast that I've done, and
very cool.
And a lot of love to Mike St. George for inviting me. We always had a lot of fun working together, and every patient I've seen that has worked with him has just said how great he is, and even right from the beginning when he was right out of school, he's been killing it. So,
thanks,
of course, my answer was yes when given this invitation. So, thank you guys.
Awesome. Yes, we do appreciate your time. So, well, without any other further ado here, let's kind of get into your background. We want to talk about, obviously, like I introduced in the beginning, you using cannabis as an alternative to opioids, but kind of get into the background of how you started into this, and give us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I mean, I trained, I did my residency in physical medicine and rehabilitation out in Seattle at the University of Washington, and that was between 2004 and 2007. And it's interesting looking back because very few states had legalized medical marijuana or cannabis back then. This is, 2004 to 2007. But Washington State legalized medical cannabis in 1998. It was kind of right after California. And so before there were dispensaries where you could go purchase cannabis, in the state of Washington, patients who had severe medical conditions could have a note from a doctor saying they have a medical condition that could benefit from cannabis. And so in my rehab clinics, we had patients with multiple sclerosis and spinal cord injuries and all sorts of crazy neurodegenerative diseases that had licenses to grow their own cannabis. And I had this experience with them in these clinics as a young doc where they would tell me, I've tried everything. Nothing has helped me with my nerve pain. I've been on the opioids. I got addicted to them. I had to stop. And cannabis helps me. And, I never thought it would be part of my practice, but I ended up doing a fellowship in sports and spine rehabilitation in Philly. And it was during my fellowship that I saw the rampant use of opioids. I mean, we had drug reps every week coming in, giving us these free lunches and recommending opioids for any type of chronic pain. And I never felt comfortable with it. I mean, it was daunting to see how, there was no end in sight. You have a person who has a chronic arthritic condition. This wasn't a pill that was going to be temporary. These were meds that they were going to have to be on for the rest of their lives. Wow. And the answer from the drug reps was, if they say their pain is worsening despite being on these meds, then just increase the dosages. Wow. And so we had tons and tons of patients on mega dosages of, OxyContin, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of thought this is just not a solution and going to be a setup for big time problems. And, lo and behold, after practicing at Rothman Orthopedics for 10 years, you know, we saw the ramifications of that type of prescribing pattern. And we saw really a crisis in the country happen, and it's still happening. So, you know, once I was out on my own, I sort of did everything that I could to help people choose alternatives to opioids. And this was before medical cannabis was legal in Pennsylvania. It's only been a few years. And so when cannabis became legal in 2018 and leading up to it, when we knew it was going to happen, I just thought this was an opportunity that we couldn't pass up on. And, you know, Rothman Orthopedics is really known for being innovative and forward thinking. Yep. And a lot of my colleagues saw that, you know, despite the fact that cannabis is still considered illegal or a Schedule I substance at the federal level, that this opioid crisis was such a big problem that this made sense. And you know, the approach that we have at Rothman Orthopedics is not just to try new treatments, but to actually try to study them and to see what works and what doesn't work. And so as a result, you know, they allowed me basically to start this program and to start certifying patients for access to medical cannabis. And really the thing that I recommended that I think thought was going to work was that we collect data on these patients, find out what they're using, what their pain levels were, what their functional scores were on validated outcome measure scores, and also to look at their opioid usage. And, you know, we are actually, you know, on the brink of publishing some of our findings, and it shows that, you know, in select patients, they're able to reduce or get off of opioids, you know, and so I think it is a viable alternative, and it's been really encouraging to see, you know, lots of my patients try it for the very first time. I mean, most of my patients are newbies to cannabis and they've never gotten high or used it recreationally, and they're really kind of just desperate out of other options, and either failed opioids or just are downright afraid of trying opioids because of the addiction potential or family histories and things like that. So, so it's been an interesting last 2.5 years, but, you know, as a result, I have a good amount of experience. I have almost 1,000 patients that I've certified.
Wow.
And, you know, there's still a lot of interest.
Mm-hmm. So the current focus with the treatment and the patient population, what would you say?
You mean like which patients
Yeah. So like, what's the current are they mostly musculoskeletal disorders, or are they, you know, are they neurological disorder?
Yeah, it's actually a mixed bag. I would say the vast majority, I mean, if you look at the numbers, chronic back pain is like number one.
Yep.
And so a lot of this is degenerative arthritic conditions. But unfortunately, we have people who had, you know, pretty bad neurological injuries, spinal cord injuries, you know, huge disc herniations that needed surgery, but the outcome wasn't perfect afterwards. You know, complications after trauma or surgery where there's a chronic pain. So it could be musculoskeletal orthopedic stuff, and sometimes it is a lot of times it's neuropathic pain. I have a lot of patients who have just fibromyalgia, and you know, not a degenerative thing, but some sort of central pain sensitization syndrome. And you know, cannabis is interesting because a lot of these patients that have chronic pain, whether it's neuropathic or musculoskeletal, you know, what comes with that pain is a whole host of other issues with sleep disorders, depression, anxiety. And that's kind of the wild thing about cannabis. It has all these different chemicals or cannabinoids in it that have been, you know, shown to help a wide variety of symptoms, you know, not just pain. And so for a lot of folks, it replaces a lot of their prescription medications. You know, you have people who are on 3 or 4 different pain meds that kind of can scale it down to cannabis and maybe an NSAID or something like that. So I think that's a huge part of my population. And then I do have some sports, younger sports athletes that are, you know, whether it's overuse injuries or micro tears and tendons and things like that, where you're not going to inject them or you're not going to do surgery on them, but they need an alternative. And I'm also doing some work with the Philadelphia Eagles as their pain management doc. And, you know, there's interest from a lot of players in the NFL, you know, with regards to, you know, sports injuries and recovery from just athletics in general. So yeah, there's a lot of different types of people coming to me for interest, but it is interesting to see how most or more majority are elderly folks with arthritic conditions who definitely are not looking to get high or intoxicated, and you know, are just looking for something to ease some of their discomfort, you know, with the understanding that there's no perfect medication out there for some of these conditions.
Right.
You know.
What?
So,
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mike. Ed.
I was going to say, how about some conditions like, you know, chronic regional pain syndrome, seeing it with that, you know, what is it showing with that? And then also, what about, because you've seen some stuff come out even with things like Parkinson's, were you implemented with that? And does it show evidence to reduce the tremors, the fessinating gait, or is that just, you know, some things that there's not enough research to show? Maybe it's one isolated case and someone says, hey, look at this, and they blow it up. Like, is it really showing good results with that, or, you know?
Well, first of all, I will say that yes, there are patients that I have with chronic regional pain syndrome, and unfortunately, some of the most, you know, problematic and difficult to treat conditions, you know, that are turning to cannabis. I personally don't see a lot of movement disorder patients, but Parkinson's patients who have chronic pain have told me anecdotally that they have noticed, you know, a dramatic improvement in their tremors and their mobility when they use cannabis. I've seen some of the videos on YouTube.
Yeah.
People like shaking like crazy, and they smoke or vape cannabis, and I mean, it's just such a dramatic change, which is fascinating. But I think there's so much that needs to be studied still. You know, there's you know, these are difficult studies to do a lot because of the federal regulatory restrictions. You know, having cannabis remain a Schedule I is our efforts. But to be honest with you, other countries don't have these restrictions and are moving forward with this types of research. You know, you see a lot of research being done in Canada and Israel, you know, even in Australia and other countries in Europe. And so I think we're going to learn a lot in the next few decades. And, you know, I'm doing my best to try and contribute to that data. But, you know, there's a difference between anecdotal and observational data and really, you know, controlled trials where there's a blinded arm. But I think we're going to see that. And if you look at the history of cannabis, you know, the receptors that we have in our body, the part of the endocannabinoid system, these were really just identified in the early 90s. So it's not that long when you think about it. We just in the last few decades, 3 decades, started to understand how these cannabinoids attach to receptors in our body and affect our human physiology. And that's undeniable now. And, you know, we're seeing that type of science is soon going to be taught in med schools, and graduate degrees are being developed in order to, you know, kind of spread the word and the knowledge about, you know, the endocannabinoid system, because it really is an integral part of our human physiology. And I think that now that we have some of the basic science down, and I think there's still a lot we're exploring, you know, these clinical trials on humans need to start happening. And in the United States and in other countries, there have been decent studies on animals, you know, preclinical studies on rats and mice,
right,
which suggest that there really could be a role for treating inflammation and pain and movement disorders, brain injuries, you know, other neurodegenerative problems in humans. And so I think that's going to happen, but the regulatory restrictions are profound, and the research is difficult to do, basically.
So
Can
that's
you,
a really good.
like in layman terms? I'm sorry, Mike, am I talking over you here? In
No.
layman terms, can you kind of just break down for the audience and explain like what actually, like, the CBD or the cannabinoids, what do they do to help with the pain?
Yeah, so CBD is a pretty interesting compound, and as many people may or may not know, that you can find CBD in hemp, which by definition has less than 0.3% THC in it, and hemp was not too long ago legalized in the United States as part of the Farm Bill, which basically removed hemp from the Controlled Substance Act. Unfortunately, when cannabis was made illegal or prohibited back in 1937, and then again by the Controlled Substance Act in 1970, hemp went with it. So just by virtue of being guilty by association, hemp, which you can't get high or intoxicated from, was basically made illegal in this country. And so I think people realized hemp has a lot of value, not just as a medicinal value, but industrial uses. You can do a lot of things with hemp, make clothing and rope, and hemp seeds I use a hemp seed powder, protein powder, and it's got
I've seen that.
a lot of really great things in it, like essential amino acids and things like that. So it's a food supplement, but CBD is prevalent in hemp and also found in cannabis or medical marijuana, what some people would refer to. And so the interesting thing about CBD or cannabidiol is that it's not intoxicating, but it has a variety of different potential mechanisms of action that have been identified mostly through preclinical studies on animals. And so there have been some interesting studies showing that when you induce an inflammatory arthritis in these animals, that CBD can work as an anti-inflammatory and an antioxidant, and it seems to have some neuroprotective properties. It's been proven to help with seizure disorders in children with very rare seizure disorders. So that's why Epidiolex, which is a cannabis-based CBD, purified CBD product, was approved by the FDA at the end of last year.
I did see that. There was a company called Black Charlotte or something like that. And there was
Charlotte's Web.
Yes. And there was that girl that was having 100 seizures a day. Because I actually listened to them on a podcast. And they talked about,
Exactly. So that's where this all started. I mean, out of desperation, families, parents of children with these very difficult to treat seizure disorders, who saw their kids basically failing to thrive, who had tried every anti-seizure drug under the sun, and they were still having hundreds of seizures a month. And these are kids that were really struggling. I mean, not being able to participate in school. Some of them were nonverbal. So again, out of desperation, some of these parents illegally obtained CBD and gave it to their kids and saw dramatic results. And I think this is what prompted, real science. So, this started off in the UK, and they did control trials with a placebo control, and then some of these trials were done in the US, and major reductions in seizure activity in these kids. And so, we're starting to see CBD used for lots of things, and I think there's been some good and bad that has come out of this. And unfortunately, it's being touted as this miracle cure for lots of different things, and you're seeing CBD in everything, like in dog treats, in deodorant, toothpaste. It's like you don't need CBD in everything, and it's not good for everything. But it's interesting because it has somewhat wide-ranging applications. And it's weird to see a chemical that does so many different things, work on, at a neuronal level as an inhibitor, and to work as an anti-inflammatory and antioxidant. So it's kind of wild, and
without a lot of side effects too, right? I mean,
it's extremely well tolerated, even at higher dosages. And that is one of the bigger problems that we see, in my opinion, with CBD is, okay, CBD might be great for certain conditions, but we don't know what the dosage should be, and it's expensive. And, there's a lot of people and companies that are making a lot of money marketing it for certain things that it may or may not help. And what I see in terms of what's available online or in retail stores is really very low dose products. So if you look at the dosages in these kids, they're taking hundreds of milligrams of CBD, and it's really expensive. This is a pharmaceutical drug, and a lot of research went into it. But, you have people taking 10 or 15 milligrams of CBD and not sure if it's helping. And I think the problem is you might need a lot more than what people are taking. It's expensive, and most folks are just not going to be able to afford hundreds of milligrams of CBD a day.
That was going to be kind of my next question. Like, how do you know what's a good source and then what's kind of like some watered down nonsense? Because I know in previous podcasts I listened to where they might have talked about it, they were saying there's certain things you look for it in terms of like the smell and what it maybe tastes like or potency or something. I mean, can you add something to that about what maybe?
Sure. I mean, this is a huge point. It's an unregulated market. Before the FDA stepped in and sort of approved Epidiolex as a pharmaceutical drug to treat seizures, it was really a free-for-all, and there was no oversight. So people were making hemp products, claiming to have CBD in them. One of my friends and colleagues did a study that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Basically, what they did was they obtained hemp-derived CBD products online from something like 30 different sources, and they did analytical testing on these products. And what they found was wide-ranging results. Some of these products had no CBD in them. Some of them had a ton of THC in them, which supposedly wasn't supposed to be present.
Guys.
And yeah, exactly. And also, what's even more scary is some of them had heavy metals in them and other.
Does it matter where the hemp plant is being grown? Like, I think it was like a hemp field next to like a factory, then the runoff coming to. Okay, yeah.
So obviously, there are standard practices that need to be followed, and some of the more reputable hemp companies, use organic farming techniques, and they use third-party testers. So you have a third party test your product in each batch that you make, and that's how you get any product. Order Charlotte's Web, or I like another one called Lazarus Naturals.
Yes, I've heard of that. Yeah,
these are companies that have pretty substantial dosed CBD products. They're not priced through the roof, and they have you can look up the label of every bottle that you buy. There's a third party that's certified that what they say is in the bottle is actually in the bottle. And so you really need that. And we have that in state-run cannabis programs like Pennsylvania, where these products are tested. The plants and the final product are tested for accuracy as to which cannabinoids are in there, and to also make sure that these other things like heavy metals and pesticides aren't present. So you really have to do your due diligence and research and make sure that you're buying a good product. And then you have to wonder whether or not the dose is right. And but to your point, Joe, it's pretty well tolerated, and there have not been a lot of reported side effects. I think one of the big questions that researchers like myself have is really how important is THC or other cannabinoids when you're using cannabis in general, right? CBD may be good in and of itself for certain things like seizures, but I have a lot of patients that say, hey, I tried hemp CBD. I even got it from Charlotte's Web, and it didn't do a whole lot for me. And then they end up getting certified for access to medical cannabis, and they add a little bit of THC to their CBD regimen, and then they see something happen or they notice something.
So does the THC then become the catalyst for the CBD? Is that?
Well, here's one of the central theories is that, cannabis is another reason it's difficult to treat. It's not a single molecule. When we do pharmaceutical research, you can study a very specific thing like ibuprofen or acetaminophen, and you see what that chemical does. But cannabis is hundreds of chemicals. And so, it's generally thought that there is some sort of a entourage effect where these cannabinoids work together to create a physiological response. And so the question is, do you need THC and how much? because the problem with THC is that it can be intoxicating and cause impairment. And so what we're looking for is the right dosage or amount of all these chemicals. And that's what's tricky. You know, it's costly to do this research. There are regulatory restrictions, but let's just say they said you can do whatever research you want. To do studies with, there's a million possibilities. You know, you could look at so many different cannabinoids, so many different ratios or dosages of THC and CBD in combination. And so what I find that is a lot of what we see in the clinic now is a lot of experimenting. It's a lot of trial and error. And the main thing that I help people do is avoid, you know, excessive intoxication and basically help them start to dose it properly. And also just to kind of give them guidance on CBD dosing, because I think a lot of people are just not seeing results because they're taking too low of a dose.
Right. All right. So for like, I know you were talking about with some of the patients with the epilepsy, but in a situation where, say, a kid comes or an athlete comes in, 19 years old, so they can make decisions on their own, but they're in college playing a sport, they don't want to use an opioid to help with some of the pain that they're dealing with, would you prescribe CBD to them?
Yeah, I think it's easy to rationalize the use of CBD in younger patients. You know, we're giving it to kids, to children,
right?
And again, I think the safety profile is there, but the question becomes, you know, what are the ramifications of THC in a developing brain? And I use a lot of caution with that. I'm pretty conservative. I don't recommend, you know, THC for people under 25, the age of 25, unless there's a really good reason. You know, I've had spinal cord injury patients that were 17, 18. I've had cancer patients with metastatic cancer all over their body and severe pain who are intolerant to opioids, who I've certified. And I think there's a way to use it, but I think that there are some potential negative ramifications of THC on the developing brain with regards to memory and cognitive development that we have to be aware of. But, you know, again, there's a difference between recreational cannabis use and medicinal cannabis use. And in my opinion, so much of that has to do with the dosing of THC. So no one has really, we know what happens to teenagers who use cannabis with high dosages of THC at a young age, right? Kids who start using marijuana for recreational use at the age of 13 oftentimes develop things like cannabis use disorder and learning and memory issues, but we have no idea what a low dose THC might do for a developing brain, someone who has a chronic pain condition or a chronic neurological condition. So there's so much we don't know, but you know, in medicine, we're generally very conservative. And I think, you know, there are risks with any type of treatment. And I think that it's easy to recommend CBD to a young athlete. And I think there may be a role for, you know, for other cannabinoids in treating, you know, musculoskeletal injuries and disorders like that.
Do you think the population has a little bit of a misunderstanding about it? Because one, it was kind of a banned substance, you know, it's still not 100% legal, but when they hear, you know, marijuana, they think about, you know, the dime bag being passed off on the street that's probably laced with other synthetic stuff, and they think of just smoking it in a joint. They're not seeing that it's something that comes from a plant, and there's, like you're saying, a little bit more controlled of these substances being used, you know, to help something, that's the far extent of abuse and exploitation.
It's unbelievable how the stigma has lingered and how people still, to this day, you know, I have patients who I'll say, hey, have you thought about trying a CBD from hemp? And just, again, guilty by association. They hear hemp, they think marijuana, they think stoners and hippies and illegal substances. and they really don't understand the difference. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's still a lot of stigma around it. But I have to say it's been encouraging to see the changes. You know, and just today I had an 80-year-old patient who came with her daughter, whose husband is a police officer. You know, and I've had other patients who just never thought in a million years they would try cannabis to treat pain because years ago they punished their kids for using it and things like that. And so I think people are realizing more and more and more that it has medicinal properties, and there's a safety level with cannabis that is, you know, much greater than a lot of other legal recreational substances. I mean, we all know people who have problems with prescription pills and with alcohol.
Yeah.
And these are substances that kill people. Like thousands and thousands of people a year die from things like tobacco, alcohol, and opioids. And these are all legal substances. And you can't die from cannabis use. You know, it doesn't cause end organ damage like kidney and liver disease. And, you know, it has some addictive properties, but again, nothing in comparison to these other substances. So I think people are recognizing that, you know, there's a safety level with cannabis that is very acceptable, and that more and more there are certain patient populations that could benefit from it. And I think cancer is really the big one. I mean,
right.
we all know someone who has had cancer, and the side effects from chemotherapy, you know, including nausea and vomiting and loss of appetite, are so profound. And I've had multiple family members who I've seen firsthand literally hadn't eaten in 36 hours, use cannabis, and their appetite comes back and they're able to put down a whole meal. And so when you see that firsthand, it's remarkable. And I think people who never thought that it should be legal or would be used as a medicine have heard from their family members that this actually does work. And there's good research behind it now showing, you know, that these chemicals help with those types of symptoms. So there is definitely a stigma still, and there's a lot of information. I think, you know, if you look at some of the recent surveys, you know, an overwhelming majority of our population now recognizes that cannabis has medicinal uses and probably should be legal, you know, for people, for patients that might benefit from it. You know, whether or not you think it should be legal from a recreational standpoint, that may be a different topic of conversation.
Right.
But, you know, none of us want to be withheld treatment, especially if we have cancer or some chronic pain like complex regional pain syndrome. None of us would want to be restricted from having access to a plant that might help us, especially after failing more conservative treatment options.
Sure.
I mean, it's just crazy to think that people in certain states where cannabis is still illegal, even for medical purposes, they have no choice other than to break the law or suffer and take other medicines that may or may not help or that they may or may not tolerate.
Yeah. So, I mean, my thought process is it's, you know, it's obviously a plant. It's given by Mother Nature, so it's grown naturally. You know, you see a lot of things that I feel like over the course of the years looking at when you may have something man-made or synthetic, there's all these like side effects. And if you actually look at the label, even just Advil, Tylenol, all the side effects that could happen, I mean, it's astounding. So when I've listened to talks about the, you know, the CBD, and even when you came and gave a talk to our company about it, it seemed like there is, you said that ecocannabinoid system, basically something in the human body that has a connection with the plant. I mean, can you describe that maybe just a little bit more as to why, I guess they're finding that it seems like we have like a symbiotic relationship with it more than we actually really knew? Because I heard that runner's high that people get isn't really endorphins. It's actually the ecocannabinoid system or something that's being released through that.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. I mean, you bring up a great topic of conversation because, you know, asking that question why, I think, is so interesting. And if you look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, the reason we have these receptors in our body is because for thousands and thousands of years, we've grown up with this plant, right? So, there is a real symbiotic relationship between, humans and the earth and the, plants that are found in our ecosystem. And so when humans thousands and thousands of years ago saw this plant, used this plant for a variety of reasons, we literally evolved to have these receptors all over our body. And again, these are receptors that were first identified in the early 1990s, but we now know that they're everywhere. There have been at least 2 receptors, CB1 and CB2, that have been identified. And we know that the CB1 receptors are throughout our central nervous system, so brain and spinal cord, but also in other areas. And that CB2 receptors are more out in the periphery and part of our immune function. And so this receptor system is really like a widespread neuromodulatory system, meaning it helps our bodies communicate with other parts of our brain, spinal cord, and organs. And it's kind of like a self-regulating system. So it participates in homeostasis. And, you could ask, why do we have nicotine receptors, right? Why do people like nicotine and use tobacco? I mean, again, this is just another example of a plant that has been around forever that humans have used. And over time, these receptors have developed and been passed on. And so, we're just starting to realize this, but, you look at the history books, I mean, we know hemp and cannabis has been around for thousands of years. We know that, in ancient China, they were using cannabis as a medicine, about 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. I mean, as far as we have written records, there's been mention of cannabis use. And so it's not new. I mean, that's the issue. And I think people don't realize that it wasn't always illegal, right? It was made illegal in the late 1930s, but in the 1920s, you could buy cannabis tinctures in little glass bottles at pharmacies without a prescription.
Wow.
And that was just normal. And, in the pharmacopoeia of medicines that doctors use that have been around for hundreds of years, in the mid 1800s, cannabis was listed as a chemical that can be used to treat things like pain and inflammation and fevers and seizures. So, we're starting to recognize with a little bit more accuracy what doctors and patients have known for a long, long time. And so, that's why it's so unfortunate that this prohibition has lasted so long. Yeah. I mean, we're talking 83 years of prohibition for a substance that is not deadly. And if you look back at alcohol prohibition, which lasted 13 years, we've got something like 80,000 people in this country a year dying from alcohol use. And everyone's cool with that. We even advertise it, right, in sports events and so on.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate. But I think that, again, as people get educated, and that's why I'm so happy to be part of this podcast, people are learning this isn't just people want to get stoned. This is part of our human physiology. Yep. This is real medicine. And there may be widespread applications, including for athletes and sports injuries. So I think the interest is growing and people are having more normal conversations about it. And, I have all these older patients, grandmas and grandpas that are now the new normal is, hey, you know what? I use cannabis instead of opioids to treat my chronic arthritic back. And that's just wild. I mean, right. See that happening.
So that's a good segue into, Joe and I definitely wanted to bring you on because we work with that high school, college athletic population. The kids are more exposed to this type of stuff. And then even in the sports, not even just pro sports, but even more like endurance athlete stuff, you're seeing CBD products pop up. They're sponsoring athletes. You're seeing it in triathlon, Ironman, CrossFit, Spartan race, all that type of stuff. And he's got, they're promoting it, and athletes are putting it on their Instagram, all that, saying, I'm using my CBD droplets, I'm sleeping great at night, recovery. So can we go into a little bit about what you're seeing on how that could work? Is this like a little bit of a placebo? I mean, how do we, I guess like you said, because you have to regulate the doses. So I guess the athletes have to do a little bit of their research first and see if this is, a company that's really looking a little more at the doses they're putting in. What are they giving them? Because, I mean, sometimes, if you're not careful at who your sponsorship is or giving you a product, I mean, athletes have made a mistake and have used the wrong things before and they get tested. So,
Exactly.
So it's interesting. You're starting to see it boom. So talk a little bit about that. And then also, I guess, the best way of dosage is sublingual. They use the creams, I think we talked about there's like gummies, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, these are all great questions. I'm, as much as I want CBD and cannabis to be good for everything, I always have to kind of put the brakes on this conversation when people get a little bit too overzealous about what CBD is good for. We just have to recognize the fact that there have been no human clinical trials on CBD in athletes or sports injuries or arthritic conditions and so on. It is really mostly anecdotal evidence. There is a basis for it, though. Again, there's a mechanism of action that has been shown in the animal model, and the question is, does that translate to humans? And in a lot of cases, things that work on animals, whether it's rats or monkeys or whatever, work for humans, and other times we're just not the same, right? But I think you have to be careful because, as mentioned before, CBD products might have other cannabinoids in them. And even if it does come from hemp, there is some THC in a lot of these products. And if you use enough CBD that has even small amounts of THC, depending on the accuracy and sensitivity of some of these drug tests, you could test positive for THC. So obviously that's a concern for, players in the NFL because they get tested. And so you could get flagged for a failed drug test when all you were using was high dosages of CBD. There are some companies that are able to remove the THC completely out of their product, but it is in hemp. And the problem with it is it is a plant, and if you know anything about agriculture and gardening or farming, when you harvest these plants, there's so many conditions that can affect what the plant produces. And if you don't get it at the right time, it could have more or less THC or CBD in it. And that you drug tested. But I think that there's a way to go about it. You know what I mean? I think that there's a safe way to go about trying a reliable hemp CBD product for the athlete. And, again, there's still a little bit of unknown, but what I usually recommend, and I'll be the first to admit I'm somewhat making this up, and part of it's based on what's available in pricing. But, some of the better companies for reasonable amounts of money can get you a 25 to 30 milligram dose of CBD. I think the sublingual route of delivery is probably one of the more efficient ways, although you could theoretically. So yeah, these are oils that are placed under the tongue that get absorbed through blood vessels in your mouth and don't have to pass through your gastrointestinal system. And I think that one of the concerns is that when you swallow one of these medications, the question is how good are our bodies at absorbing? And I think, like with any drug, you have people that respond to it and people that don't. So there's no perfect drug out there. There's no drug that works for everybody, for every condition. And you're going to see some people that try great CBD products, healthy dosages, and just don't see anything happen. And there are going to be some people that at certain dosages that are going to have some side effect, whether it's I felt tired, I've had people tell me they had nightmares. I mean, all sorts of weird stuff that you don't even know if it's related to the CBD. But the point is, there are people out there that are trying this and saying it either didn't work or caused side effects, but nothing serious that I've seen. In some of the Epidiolex studies on the kids with seizures, they're using substantially higher dosages than people in the general population. And there was some liver toxicity or increased liver enzymes in some of these kids. But again, we're talking, 300 or more milligrams. And so I think at these lower dosages that most people are purchasing, 25 to 30 milligrams once, twice, or maybe even 3 times a day might be reasonable. But there's just unfortunately a lot of myths out there. There's people that say it's good for sleep, and there are a number of studies showing that it doesn't affect sleep at all. And I've been trying to stay as up to date on this as possible. Every year for the last 4 years, I've gone to the International Cannabinoid Research Society meeting, and there are always research presentations on sleep. And just last year there was one, and they literally looked. People were taking, I think, 300 milligrams of CBD, and there just wasn't a statistically significant amount of people that saw improved sleep. So it's a weird drug where sometimes more of it doesn't work better. Oftentimes there's sort of like a low dose that doesn't work and a high dose that doesn't work, but somewhere in the middle there's more efficacy. And so we have to test all these different dosages on all these different medical conditions to come up with real guidelines. And because we don't have those guidelines, we're sort of making things up as we go. And I think there's a way to counsel patients on how to do this, or athletes. And I think there's a way to do it on your own because you don't need a prescription. But I think you need to pay attention to the dose, and the route of the delivery is really important. I personally I've seen more people tell me that CBD topically did not help them. I see some that do, but I see so many that think it didn't work. And I've been very, very surprised to see how well topical THC works for some people. So I'm talking about the same people that told me CBD topically did nothing for me. They get certified for cannabis, they get a THC lotion, and they swear it works better than any topical they've ever used. So again, this is more anecdotal stories that I'm sharing with you, but over the last 2.5 years, I can say with confidence that it seems to me that topical THC works better than topical CBD. And that's not for everyone. Some people think CBD topically works wonderful. But the question is that part placebo? But I think if you're going to ingest CBD, it's probably the best route of delivery may be the sublingual route, because you bypass the GI tract and liver metabolism. And in theory, you're getting it into your bloodstream if you're able to leave it under your tongue and in your mouth or oral mucosa for long enough.
So to me, it would make sense if you were maybe an athlete looking at pursuing this, you'd want to ask the company where they're getting their sources from the plant. Is this something that is grown in a controlled environment? Is it in some field somewhere? Can they even give you those answers? Because I didn't know it's the same thing with nutrition companies. They are now providing where their food's coming from, the farms, the treatment of the animals that they're getting their food from. So people are starting to look a little more specific as to where the products are coming from.
Yeah, you want to see a certificate, of analysis from a third party.
Okay.
And you have to trust that, that third party has no financial interest in the product's success. And so, that's really important. And I think that's one of the easiest things that consumers can do. This is available online. The sites that we've mentioned, you can pick a product and there should be a certificate of analysis, and you can see what's been tested for, what the dosages are. And then it's a little bit of trial and error. But I think, with a plant that's been around for thousands and thousands of years, most patients are unlikely to see problems come of trying it. But it's always going to be helpful to get some input from a physician. The problem is there are very few physicians out there that have any knowledge about cannabinoids and cannabis medicine. And even people like myself, who have experience, there's still more questions than answers that we have. And so, little by little, I think we're gaining more knowledge, and people are sharing their experiences. But like I said, one person's experience isn't always going to translate to the next 100. Right. And you want to see consistency. You know what I mean? And that's where it's at.
are you still using other forms of pain management? Are you still prescribing like TENS units, traction units, things like that? I mean, are you kind of just, looking a little more towards this or other things?
I mean, we use a multimodal care plan. So it's really a combination of, PT exercise-based treatments. I still prescribe NSAIDs, muscle relaxants sometimes. I prescribe a lot of neuropathic pain medications such as gabapentin and pregabalin. I mean, I use everything, but I try to limit my use of opioids. And, I always try to guide patients to use, the most conservative, least invasive treatment options first and foremost. Yep. And explain what comes after that. If these initial treatments work, if you can go to, Mike St. George and get PT and take a couple Advil and you're better, why do anything beyond that, right? But the reality is sometimes these things don't work, or they don't work well enough, and people are still having pain or limited function. And so, I definitely keep an open mind about anything that might help, whether it's acupuncture, traction, chiropractic care, osteopathic manipulation. I think it all has a place.
Can you describe when it would be appropriate to use an opioid, and what that treatment cycle should look like? Because now people see opioids, they think 100% negative, I don't want that, as opposed to understanding when and where that should be implemented and why it's gotten far away and become abused.
Yeah, I mean, look, the reality is, as much as I'm a proponent for non-opioids and cannabis as treatment for chronic pain, almost every day I write an opioid prescription. And, a majority of the time I prescribe opioids for, acute severe pain, whether it's from like a recent or new disc herniation, a work injury, a fracture. I prescribe opioids for compression fractures of the spine and post-surgical pain. But, I think our conversation with patients has changed, and the take-home message is the longer you're on opioid pain medications, the more risk there is. There's a huge potential for opioid dependence, even after taking these medicines for a week or two. I mean, 7 to 10 days, some people are going to start to have, physical dependence on this medicine, which can lead to misuse, abuse, addiction, and potentially accidental overdose and death. And so when you explain that to patients, it scares them in a good way. And people, these medications work great for acute pain. And I'll be the first to admit that cannabis and CBD probably isn't that effective for very acute pain. You don't want to wake up from surgery and be handed some CBD gummies or even a THC capsule. You know what I mean? Because opioids work great when you wake up from anesthesia and you just were cut open, or if you fell and broke your arm. I mean, there's a real role for them, but there's risks, there's side effects. And so, we just tell people, we're going to give you a limited amount of opioids. We're going to recommend you use them only if you need them, and to try other things first if you can. And the sooner you can reduce your dosages and stop using the medicine, the better. I think that message resonates with people, and I think it's been really effective. And we have found that people are listening to this conversation more seriously now than ever, and taking into consideration these alternatives.
So where could an athlete or anyone that is in pain, that is looking to seek alternative ways, how could they find you?
I mean, it's pretty easy. Rothman Orthopedics has a variety of ways of scheduling appointments. There's an 800 number. It's 321-9999. We do on our website. You can schedule appointments online. But yeah, our call center gets a lot of action every day, and we do the best that we can to get patients to see the right type of physician for their problem. Currently, I'm the only physician at Rothman Orthopedics that does cannabis certifications, but we are actually looking to expand the program because it's been so successful. And so about 10 or so of my colleagues have been interested in being able to recommend and certify patients for access to cannabis. So, with that, I think is going to come more research opportunities because, like I said, we're trying to collect outcome measures and really important data about what patients are using and how that affects their pain and function scores. Which dosages cause side effects and intoxication and which dosages don't. That's going to help us create guidelines for other physicians and how to recommend it. And so, I think that's part of, being, if you want to be part of this progress that we're making, yeah, you can get certified by anyone, doc in a box or something like that. But being part of the research, I think, is helpful, and I think people like it. They take it seriously. It takes a few extra minutes to fill out these questionnaires, but, they're getting something out of it and they're seeing the results, whether they work or they're not. They're figuring out, which products didn't help their pain or didn't help them sleep and which products were great. And I think that the more data we have, the more we can kind of push for changes, in our legal system. And that's going to just open up more opportunities for again, research and help more patients over time.
So what is your time going to look like now if you're working with the Philadelphia Eagles? You're going to be split time in the office, time down at the, NovaCare complex, at the stadium? Like what, I guess if the season picks up, will you be on the field with them? I mean, and then what type of conversations you having with these guys? Because I know over the years I've learned sometimes working with a professional athlete can be a little tough because, these guys have their ways, they're making the millions, and they're going to say, who are you to tell me what to do, man? So you got to listen, dude. So.
Yeah, I mean, I for right now, my clinic is pretty much the same as it's ever been, but I'm available basically as a consultant to the Eagles players, and I'll go down there during the season periodically to check in and just to be available. There are times where the medical staff, has some difficult cases, some problems handling pain, and they're looking for just a curbside consult. It's just a quick phone call with the medical staff, the other docs, the trainers, or the player themselves. But more and more people have questions about cannabis and CBD, and a lot of players are interested in using it, but they're concerned about the drug testing and things like that. I think the NFL as a league is becoming more interested in studying CBD, or at least in research that's being done outside of the league that might be pertinent to athletes and sports performance and recovery. So again, a lot of it's having the type of conversations that we're having right now, where to source it and how to give it an honest chance at working with regards to dosing and routes of delivery. But I think my role with the Eagles is going to evolve over time, and I think some of that has to do with potential changes in the way the league views CBD. But it's interesting in my mind to see how, we know CBD does something for seizure disorders, which is obviously a brain disorder, and concussion is a big concern.
Yeah, they're looking at any research into concussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a potential research opportunity, is to see if, CBD might help recovery from head injury, concussion, and so on. But yeah, there is something about cannabis that, again, has been shown to have neuroprotective properties. And I think that it's a real opportunity to look at a substance that, is less harmful than other pharmaceuticals and recreational drugs. And like I said, I think the next few decades of science and research is going to really open the door for a lot of other treatments.
Awesome. That is some good stuff right there, baby.
Yeah, man.
That is some good stuff, man. Michael, we're just, I don't know, we're on a roll here. We get Rothman doctors, we get people from the University of Villanova. This is good stuff. Valuable information, man.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely an awesome opportunity when Excel was contracted with Rothman to be able to get in there, because I networked with so many of docs like Dr. Greis, and then, your colleagues. Who you mostly working with now? Who's in the posse where you're hanging out?
Man, it's constantly changing.
Oh, man.
But we've grown so much since you were around.
Yeah.
It's wild, but my region, which is basically, I'm kind of spread out. I'm in the city one day a week at our 9th and Chestnut office. I'm out in King of Prussia one day, and then I'm in Bryn Mawr. So I have a nice little spread because each office is unique in its own right and draws from different parts of the area. But I'm so fortunate. I have so many great colleagues to lean on, great surgeons to refer to, and they've been all so supportive of this cannabis program. I mean, most of the people who I've certified come from referrals from my colleagues.
Yep.
It is some of my own patients, but I'm not pushing this on anyone.
Right.
And the conversation just comes up, whether it's a patient bringing it up at, hey, what about medical cannabis for pain? I know it's a qualifying condition in the state of Pennsylvania. I know people that say it helped. What do you think? Almost across the board, most of my colleagues are supportive of this idea that it might be worth trying, that it's a safer alternative to opioids. And, I think that's one of the reasons, that's one of the main reasons that I have so many patients and a good amount of experience doing this. But it is, it's been rewarding. I mean, we have data showing that, large percentages of people who were on opioids before their cannabis certification visit are off their opioids within 6 months. And the ones that are still on an opioid have reduced their dosages, sometimes by 40, 50%. So, and that's huge, because I don't have anything against opioids. If there are small patient populations of people that have chronic pain that can take an opioid at a low dose for years and years and years without escalating their dose, and they get relief. It helps improve their pain and function. But the risk is those people that escalate, right? The accidental overdoses don't happen from people taking 5 or 10 milligrams of oxycodone. It's the people that start off on those dosages that end up on 40, 60, 80 milligrams, and then sometimes, unfortunately, transition to things like heroin. Right. And that's the danger, where you can accidentally overdose. Oftentimes from going to rehab and stopping your opioid use, and then getting a rehab to used to before rehab, and then having an accidental overdose where you basically stop breathing.
So isn't it the dependency that happens with these opioids almost create this chemical change in your body where it becomes dependency? Because I know when I have listened to even people talk about when they've recovered from addiction, how hard it is, even like heroin, the withdrawal that your body goes through, because eventually it becomes more than just a high and going out and having fun and partying. These people have actually said it becomes, I needed it to function. And when they don't, the withdrawal is like hell, and the rehab they go through is tough. So some of them, it's almost like you got to do a cold turkey, but it's like going through hell, basically.
No, people continue their opioid use, oftentimes just to avoid the horrible withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah.
I mean, people, it's known as dope sickness, but when, you basically feel sicker than you've ever felt, the worst flu of your life. And when you take your pills, your medication, you feel normal again. Yeah. So that physical dependence is real, and a lot of people do it just to feel normal. But again, the risk is at these higher dosages. And so if you can get people who are on moderate dosages and are at risk for increasing, if you can get them down to more reasonable levels of opioids, they're safe. They're completely safe. But there are just, unfortunately, small percentages of the population that are prone to addiction. Yeah. And we have to recognize that. I mean, it's not their fault. It's their genetics. It's a medical condition, and we should treat it like one. they're not criminals. They don't mean to be hurting themselves or other people, but it's a vicious cycle. And so, people are very happy to be off an opioid that they were on for years. I mean, it's freeing, right?
Yeah.
You're really, you're dependent on a drug. You can't live your life the way you want to live. You're always thinking about, what am I going to run out of my medication? To have that off your mind is liberating. And I think a lot of people just are thankful for that opportunity to try something as an alternative. And there's some interesting data on opioids and cannabinoids, and basically showing that, oftentimes people that use cannabis are able to reduce their opioid dosages. And one of the ways that they do that is because cannabis can sometimes help with withdrawal symptoms, and can calm you. And so, that can help people avoid going back to their pills. So it's interesting. And I think that it's just a widespread issue that we have. And we have to come up with new, better ways of dealing with it.
Well, I'll tell you what, we would love to have you back on after you do some more research on this. And, so
of course,
yeah, this is great stuff. And obviously with this, we understand that, it takes time. You have to have the data behind it and do more testing. But I would be curious to see if the NFL does more of this to help with concussions. That's an interesting topic there. Yeah,
I think that'll be neat. And I think, I think a lot of players leave the league and they're pretty banged up. And, we see, the glory on Sundays of these players and celebrating, and it looks great. But you know what? Like, at the end of the day, a lot of these guys, their bodies are beat up, and the arthritic conditions that they suffer from at much younger ages than the regular population. And that's something that they have to deal with for the rest of their lives. And so, a lot of these guys they take great care of their bodies, but the nature of the sport is everyone is getting injured. It's 100% injury rate. And it's just, how do you recover from these injuries on a weekly basis? How do you get sleep at night to recuperate? And I think that's why, things like cannabis and CBD have, interest. There's a lot of interest in them because, they're just repercussions of a lot of these other drugs. And it'll be very interesting to see how, the professional sports teams, not just the NFL, approach cannabis as an alternative to opioids. And, obviously there's a lot of money in these leagues that could help support research. So, I think it'll be very interesting to see how things progress. And I would love to come back on the show and report back. I'm also interested to hear what you guys are seeing, because, stories about people who are excelling in their sport and their stories about the supplements and their routines, it's all fascinating. Whether it's their diet or their workout routines, their rehab program, and then what are they doing to treat pain, recovery, inflammation, sleep, all that. It's really fascinating stuff.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you guys do develop a product, you better believe Jerry Jones will get his hand in that pot and be the first one. Man, that guy's out of control. I ran a Spartan race there last year in the stadium, and that facility is just insane. I mean,
I'd love to see that. Yeah.
The money. But, this is why we like bringing on individuals like yourself onto the podcast, because, podcasts have really blown up. Probably, Joe Rogan started, that's real popular. But now you're starting to get these more individualized ones, and there's some that are really, really big, probably like nationally listened to. And then there's some a little bit more regional. And I think ours right now is beneficial regionally, where we could get the greater Philadelphia area to start tuning in, so we could start helping to talk about this and get, the athletes, the kids, the therapists, parents to start listening and kind of getting educated, because there's so many patients that I have a conversation with that just don't know. They don't know. And if they could listen to a local podcast of, facilities and companies and people that they're familiar with, it's a little bit more trustworthy, so be more invested in their time, but they can learn a little bit and say, wow, I didn't know that, and be directed in the right direction. Because there's so many people that just don't know like basic things. They don't even know where to go to find a good physician. So now at this point in my career, it's good to say, yeah, go see Dr. Greis for this, or go see this person for that, because I've worked with them, I know, and then, hey, listen to this podcast because here's some good knowledge for you. It's 30 minutes to an hour, just sit and listen to it, especially now during this time where everything is kind of shut down a little bit. People have a little more time, go outside and listen to this on a walk or something and learn a little bit, because that's the only way I think things are going to expand is through talking about this, because we live in an age where the knowledge is all out there. And Joe and I talk about this all the time. I mean, with the social media platforms, there's information everywhere, but what's the right information and what's garbage? So if we could find credible sources, get people's ears to listen to that, they're going to learn more and make better decisions,
No doubt. And I think I love what you guys are doing. And really just what you said, it's having normal conversations about this, right? I mean, we talked about the stigma around cannabis and hemp, and all it takes is, normal people talking about this plant and, discussing its history and discussing its pros and cons, and not being sort of like too overzealous about what it is and what it's good for. I think people debate all the time now about everything. And I think we can all agree that, our health matters more than anything. And we're all looking for an edge, whether it's in sports or at work. But we all need more sleep than we're getting. And we all want to exercise more. But we're also all aging. And, whether you're a young kid who gets injured playing sports, or you're, someone in their mid 40s like myself who's still trying to be an athlete but dealing with some of the, early degenerative stuff. We all want to maintain our functional capabilities and enjoy our lives. And we have decisions to make when we get injured or when we have some pain. And really, that's what this conversation is about. How do you make the right decision? What's the safest, treatment option? And what's going to be the most effective? And, the benefit of medicine is really that we focus on science and real results. And, there's a huge difference between, a crappy research study and a really high quality research study. And when you discuss, the way that we've studied cannabinoids and the human body in the animal models, and then hopefully moving forward more in human clinical trials, we're going to just have so much more data to share. And I think that the stigma will just kind of go away, because people are going to just think of this as, a medicine in its own right, with the understanding that people use cannabis recreationally. And I think, there's a role for that as well, right? People use lots of drugs, and the reality is a lot of it's as a stress reliever, right? People think of having alcohol after work just to relax, and I think it's the same idea that people that use cannabis as a relaxant. There's a fine line between a medicinal use of a product and a recreational use. You know what I mean? It's all in the way you think of it, really.
Cheech and Chong blowout.
Yeah, but there's a difference between getting high and acting like an idiot, and having no memory of what happened to you that day, right, and using a little bit of THC to get a good night's sleep. There's a distinct difference. Or using THC to feel drowsy while you watch, a couple hours of television before going to bed. You know what I mean? There's a way. What I try to explain to my patients is, there's a way to use THC and CBD where you're not intoxicated or impaired, but you might feel relaxed, you might feel happy, you might find some pleasure in it. Right. And I think we can all agree that that's okay, right? We all want to be happy, we all want to feel less stress. And figuring out how to accomplish that without harming your body is really important. And if your go-to is I need to drink a 6-pack of beer to relax at the end of the day, that your liver's not going to be happy after a number of years.
Yeah.
And so these are real decisions that people have to make. And we just want to be open and honest about this discussion. And I think it's going to help people make their own decisions that are best for them.
Great stuff. Dr. Greis, I really appreciate your time tonight. Dr. Mike, as always, I appreciate your time. Where can people find you, Mike?
Instagram, icor_St. George. I'm on Facebook, but not really on that recently. Facebook's so toxic right now. You just go there if you want to, I don't know, do whatever. Same thing as taking a 6-pack to the face. You're going to get the same result. Feel really trashed after. So I'm mostly Instagram. We post stuff like this, the fitness stuff, the workouts, and also the rehab stuff. So
Cool.
Dr. Greis, are you on social media?
I don't post much. I do have a Dr. Ari Greis Instagram. I mostly post stuff related to the cannabis work that I'm doing.
Okay.
But I'm not a heavy poster, but I'm on there, and I hope to do more. But
any garage workouts, man?
oh yeah.
All right, you got to post some garage workouts.
There you go. There
I
you
don't know
go.
if people want to see that, but we'll see.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. And you can find me at Coach_Haas. That's Coach_Haas on Instagram. Guys, great night. Have a great weekend. And Dr. Greis, thank you again for your time.
Thanks for having me, guys. Take
Thank
care.
All right, boys, we're out.
I'll see you.
Have a good one.